The sound of ribs cracking against a metal armrest is something you never forget. It's a dull, wet snap that sucks the air out of a confined space and replaces it with something heavier. Dread, shock, the visceral knowledge that a line has been crossed and there's no walking it back. But the loudest sound on Flight 373 wasn't the screaming or the tearing of expensive fabric or the sickening thud of a human body hitting industrial carpet. It was the silence that followed three simple words, spoken into a cracked iPhone screen 20 minutes later. Words that would unravel an entire corporation, thread by thread, until nothing remained but lawsuits and bankruptcy filings and the hollow-eyed stares of people who'd learned too late that some passengers aren't just passengers. Execute the liquidity clause. But that came later. 18 hours earlier, none of it had started. 18 hours earlier, Marcus Sterling woke up in his Chicago penthouse at 5 a.m. to the sound of his phone vibrating against the glass nightstand, a sound that had become Pavlovian over the years, urgent, insistent, the kind that meant someone's world was ending and they needed a lawyer to either save it or document the rubble. He reached for it without opening his eyes, muscle memory guiding his thumb to the answer button, and heard his assistant's voice on the other end, tight with the kind of control that only comes from delivering bad news to people who pay you not to panic. The hospital in Washington, D.C. His mother, Dorothy Sterling, 71 years old, diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 6 months ago, given a year to live, and defying that prognosis with the same stubborn dignity she'd brought to everything else in her life. The oncologist's voice in the background filtered through his assistant's phone, explaining that the latest scans showed rapid progression, that they were moving her to palliative care, that if Marcus wanted to see her one more time, really see her, not the morphine-hazed shell she'd become in the final hours, he had maybe 36 hours, maybe less. Marcus sat up. The Chicago skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, still dark, the kind of pre-dawn darkness that makes a city look like a circuit board, all glowing nodes and connections and invisible currents of energy flowing from place to place. He'd bought this penthouse 7 years ago with the signing bonus from his first major corporate restructuring case, back when Sterling and Hayes Law was still a boutique firm scrambling for clients, before they'd built the reputation that now preceded them into every boardroom and courtroom in the Midwest. He'd furnished it carefully, mid-century modern, clean lines, nothing that screamed wealth, but everything that whispered it, if you knew where to look. The kind of place designed to impress clients who needed to believe their lawyer was successful, but not so successful he'd forgotten what hunger felt like. He showered, dressed in the dark, pulled on a charcoal hoodie that had cost $800 at a boutique on Michigan Avenue, but looked like something you'd find at a mall clearance rack, the kind of garment designed by Italian tailors who understood that real wealth doesn't announce itself. Added jeans that fit perfectly without trying, sneakers that cost more than most people's car payments but bore no visible branding. Checked his phone. 6:45. If he left now, caught a cab to O'Hare, he could make the 9:45 flight to Washington Reagan, be at the hospital by 1 in the afternoon, sit with his mother, hold her hand, tell her the things that needed saying before the morphine took her somewhere he couldn't follow. He called the airline Skywing because they had the only direct flight that landed before 2 p.m. The automated system cheerfully informed him that yes, seats were available, and yes, he could book now. And the total came to $1,217 for a middle seat in the back of the plane. Economy. Row 28, seat B, right next to the lavatory, that engineering afterthought where bathrooms got wedged into fuselages and everyone pretended not to notice the smell. He didn't care. He entered his credit card information, received the confirmation email, boarding pass attached, gate B47. Boarding begins 9:15 p.m. His assistant sent him the contract files he'd requested. Skywing Airlines, corporate structure, debt obligations, the kind of due diligence that any lawyer with a $300 million fund under management kept updated as a matter of course. Sterling and Hayes didn't just practice law. They managed the Blackstone Vanguard Fund, a private equity vehicle that bought distressed corporate debt and either nursed it back to health or harvested the organs for parts. Skywing was one of their holdings. $650 million in convertible bonds, purchased at a discount 3 years ago, when the airline had overextended itself trying to compete with the legacy carriers. The bonds came with covenants, protections, the kind of fine print that gave creditors extraordinary power if certain conditions were met. Marcus had negotiated those terms personally. He knew every clause, every trigger, every pressure point. He didn't think about it then. Later, he'd remember scrolling through those contracts in the back of an Uber, noting the liquidity requirements, the material adverse change provisions, the acceleration clauses that could turn $650 million of long-term debt into a payment due tomorrow crisis if the creditor decided to pull that particular lever. But at 6:45 in the morning, hurtling down Lakeshore Drive toward O'Hare International Airport, Marcus Sterling was just a son trying to reach his dying mother before she slipped away. The contracts were habit, background noise, the professional equivalent of checking the weather. The Uber driver didn't speak. Marcus preferred it that way. He watched the city blur past, the lakefront giving way to neighborhoods, giving way to industrial sprawl, giving way to the sprawling concrete expanse of O'Hare, one of the busiest airports in the world, a monument to humanity's desperate need to be anywhere but here. They pulled up to Terminal 3. Marcus tipped 30%, grabbed his leather duffel, one change of clothes, toiletries, a legal pad he'd probably never use, and walked into the fluorescent buzz of pre-security chaos. 8:30 p.m. The terminal hummed with that specific frequency of exhausted travelers and frayed nerves, everyone racing toward gates or waiting in line or slumped in chairs, scrolling through phones with dead eyes. Marcus joined the security line, shuffled forward, pulled out his driver's license and boarding pass when he reached the TSA podium. The agent, a middle-aged white man with a belly that strained against his uniform shirt, glanced at the documents, glanced at Marcus, glanced back at the documents, took longer than necessary. Finally scanned the boarding pass and waved him through. The metal detector line moved slowly. Marcus watched travelers ahead of him. White woman in yoga pants waved through. White man in a business suit waved through. Elderly white couple waved through. He stepped up to the detector, emptied his pockets into the gray bin, laptop out, shoes off, belt off, walked through. No beep. Clean. The TSA agent on the other side, a younger man with a kind of buzz cut that suggested military service, pointed at Marcus's bag. "Sir, we need to check that." Marcus nodded, stepped aside, watched as the agent unzipped the duffel and began removing items one by one. Shirts, socks, underwear, the legal pad, a book Marcus had packed but wouldn't read. The agent's hands moved slowly, methodically, examining each item as if it might spontaneously transform into contraband. Behind Marcus, the line backed up. A white businessman in his 50s sighed audibly. A woman with 2 children checked her watch. The agent finished, re-zipped the bag, handed it back without explanation or apology. "You're clear." Marcus repacked, put his shoes back on, checked his phone. 8:55. He'd missed Group 1 boarding, which meant he'd be fighting for overhead bin space in an already crowded cabin. He shouldered the duffel and headed for the tram that would take him from the security checkpoint to Concourse B. The train car was packed, bodies pressed together in that awkward airport intimacy where everyone pretends not to notice how close they're standing. Marcus found a corner, let the motion of the train rock him gently, tried not to think about his mother's voice on the phone last week, thin and papery, telling him she'd made her peace with things, that she'd had a good life, that he shouldn't feel guilty about the times he'd chosen work over visits, because she understood. She'd always understood. That's what ambitious men do, and she was proud of him. Gate B47 materialized at the end of a long corridor, the kind of gate that feels like an afterthought, tucked away from the main traffic flow. A cluster of travelers had already formed near the desk, that pre-boarding scrum of people terrified they won't get their carry-ons stowed. Marcus hung back, pulled out his phone, scrolled through emails, found the one from his assistant with the Skywing contracts attached, opened it, started reading, not because he expected to need it, just because reading contracts was what he did when he needed to think about something other than the fact that his mother was dying, and he'd spent the last 6 months telling himself he'd visit next month, always next month. And now next month had run out. The gate agent's voice crackled over the PA system, saccharine with that passive-aggressive sweetness that comes from years of being yelled at by strangers. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Skywing is pleased to begin boarding for Flight 373 with service to Washington Reagan National Airport. At this time, we'd like to invite our first-class passengers and Diamond Medallion members to board. Marcus watched the privilege stream forward. A man in his 60s wearing a Rolex and an expression of profound entitlement. A younger woman in business casual who walked like she owned the jet bridge. A family with 2 children, the parents radiating that specific exhaustion that comes from traveling with small humans who haven't yet learned that planes require inside voices. The gate agent scanned their passes with brisk efficiency. Green beeps, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. The theater of commercial aviation playing out exactly as scripted. Now boarding Group 2. Marcus waited. He was Group 4. Economy. The unwashed masses. He didn't care about status. Status was a performance, and Marcus Sterling had learned young that performing was exhausting. Better to be underestimated. Better to look like someone who didn't belong in the rooms he occupied. People talked more freely around those they dismissed, revealed more, made mistakes, and mistakes were how lawyers built empires. His phone buzzed. Text from Nathan Hayes, his law partner and the other half of Sterling and Hayes. Heard about your mom. Take all the time you need. We've got the Riverside case covered. Marcus typed back. Thanks. Should be back Friday. He didn't mention that today was Tuesday. Didn't mention that he'd be returning for a funeral, not a reunion. Didn't mention that the woman who'd raised him alone after his father died when Marcus was 8, raised him in a South Side Chicago apartment with peeling paint and radiators that clanked through winter nights, raised him to believe that intelligence and discipline could overcome anything, including the way strangers looked at black boys in hoodies, was about to become past tense. Nathan would figure it out. Nathan always did. Boarding Group 4. Marcus stood, joined the queue, shuffled forward with the practiced patience of someone who'd spent countless hours in exactly these lines, waiting for exactly these moments, the bureaucratic friction points where institutions processed human beings like cargo, and everyone pretended it was normal. He reached the podium, held out his phone with the mobile boarding pass displayed. The gate agent, a woman in her mid-50s with Sharon Mills on her name tag and lipstick that looked like she'd applied it in a moving vehicle, took the phone, scanned it, frowned, scanned again. The reader beeped red. This doesn't look right. Marcus kept his voice even. I booked 3 hours ago through your app. Sharon squinted at the screen like it had personally offended her. We don't usually get last-minute bookings for this route. She drew out the words, loading them with subtext. Let me call a supervisor. Behind Marcus, the line began to congeal. He could feel it, that thickening of air that happens when crowds sense delay. Someone coughed pointedly. Sharon picked up a phone, pressed buttons, spoke in a low voice Marcus couldn't quite parse, hung up. Scanned the pass again. Red beep. Again. Red beep. Again. Finally, on the 4th attempt, green. You're all set. She handed back the phone without meeting his eye. 28B. Marcus took it, walked down the jet bridge. The gate agent's perfunctory smile had contained an entire conversation, one he'd learned to read decades ago. The conversation went, You don't belong here. I know it. You know it. We're both going to pretend otherwise, but we know. It was the kind of conversation that happened 100 times a day in 100 different contexts, invisible to the people it didn't target, exhausting to the people it did. The aircraft door loomed ahead. Just inside, a flight attendant stood checking boarding passes, a woman in her early 50s with Jennifer Walsh on her name tag, and the kind of smile that looked like it had been painted on and left to dry. She glanced at Marcus, at his hoodie, his jeans, his complete lack of business traveler signifiers. Her smile dimmed a few watts. "Sir, can I verify your seat assignment?" Marcus showed her the phone. 28B. Jennifer leaned in, studying the screen with an intensity that suggested she was decoding nuclear launch codes rather than reading 3 characters. She looked up at Marcus. "Are you sure this is your seat?" "Yes, ma'am." She tilted her head toward the cockpit door, visible just beyond the galley. Inside, Marcus could see a man in a captain's uniform, silver-haired, probably late 50s, talking to another crew member. Jennifer caught his eye. Made a gesture Marcus couldn't quite interpret. The captain nodded, turned back to his conversation. Jennifer waved Marcus through. "All right, enjoy your flight." Marcus moved down the narrow aisle. The plane was already mostly full, overhead bins yawning open, passengers wedging bags into spaces that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Row 28 was exactly where you'd expect. Back of the plane, port side, right where the galley smell and lavatory smell formed an olfactory demilitarized zone. The window seat held a toddler, maybe 3 years old, already fussing in that pre-tantrum frequency that every parent recognizes and every non-parent dreads. The aisle seat was occupied by a middle-aged white man whose cologne suggested he'd bathed in a duty-free shop. Marcus squeezed into 28B, stowed his duffel under the seat in front of him. Overhead bins were long gone. Buckled in. Pulled out his phone one more time before they closed the doors and told everyone to switch to airplane mode. Opened the email from his assistant, scrolled to the Skywing contract attachments. Started reading. Section 4.2, Material Adverse Change Provisions. Section 5.1, Financial Covenants. Section 7.3, Events of Default. The language was dense, technical, the kind of prose that makes non-lawyers' eyes glaze over and makes Marcus Sterling's pulse quicken, because this was his native tongue, the vocabulary of power and leverage and the precise calibration of risk. Skywing Airlines had borrowed $650 million 3 years ago, agreed to maintain certain liquidity ratios, agreed to avoid certain operational disruptions, agreed that if any of these conditions were materially breached, the creditor, Blackstone Vanguard Fund, managed by Sterling and Hayes Law, could declare the entire principal amount immediately due and payable. It was a standard clause. Every major debt instrument had some version of it. The nuclear option, the lever you installed and hoped never to pull because pulling it meant mutual destruction, creditor and debtor going down together in a fireball of litigation and bankruptcy proceedings. Marcus had negotiated hundreds of these clauses, never triggered one. The math rarely made sense. Better to restructure, renegotiate, find a solution that let both parties walk away with something. But the clause existed. And Marcus Sterling, sitting in seat 28B with a toddler starting to wail on his left and cologne fog rolling in from his right, was the person who could pull that lever. He didn't think about it consciously, not yet. It was just information, context, the kind of thing lawyers file away in the back of their minds alongside statutes and precedents and the phone numbers of judges' clerks. The cabin door closed with that heavy mechanical thunk that meant they were sealed in now, pressurized tube hurtling towards some distant runway. The toddler's wails escalated. The cologne man cracked his knuckles. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to remember what his mother's voice had sounded like before the cancer hollowed it out. 9:45. Right on schedule. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, smooth and authoritative. the voice of a man who'd spent 3 decades telling passengers not to worry while secretly calculating fuel reserves and weather patterns. Good evening, folks. This is Captain Robert Hayes. Welcome aboard Skywing Flight 373 with service to Washington Reagan. We're expecting a flight time of about 2 hours. Should have you on the ground around midnight local time. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for departure. Marcus opened his eyes, pulled up the Federal Aviation Regulations on his phone before the Wi-Fi cut out, scrolled to Part 250, Oversales. The legal framework governing what happens when airlines sell more tickets than seats and need to convince people to volunteer for later flights. The regulation was clear. Once passengers were seated, involuntary denied boarding required specific protocols: compensation, rebooking, written explanation of rights. Airlines couldn't just point at someone and say, "Get off," not without cause, not without following the rules. He bookmarked the section. Habit more than preparation. Marcus Sterling hadn't become one of Chicago's most successful corporate attorneys by leaving things to chance. The plane began to taxi. Marcus felt the familiar acceleration, the way the aircraft gathered itself before committing to the sky. Around him, passengers settled into their routines. Books, tablets, sleep masks, noise-canceling headphones. The toddler had quieted to a whimper. The cologne man was already snoring. Marcus stared at the seat back in front of him and thought about his mother's hands, the way they'd looked when she'd helped him with homework at the kitchen table, ink-stained from her job at the print shop, calloused from decades of making ends meet. Strong hands, gentle hands, hands that were probably too weak now to hold a pen. The engines spooled up, the plane paused at the runway threshold, and then they were moving, accelerating, that moment of commitment when physics takes over and there's nothing to do but trust that the engineers got the math right. Marcus felt the nose lift, the wheels leave pavement, Chicago dropping away beneath them, a grid of lights receding into darkness. He didn't know it yet, but in exactly 17 minutes, everything would start to unravel. In 17 minutes, Captain Robert Hayes would make an announcement that would set off a chain reaction ending in blood and lawsuits and a corporation brought to its knees. In 17 minutes, Marcus Sterling would transform from passenger to plaintiff to something far more dangerous. But for now, he was just a man in a middle seat, flying through the night to say goodbye to the person who taught him that dignity wasn't something anyone could give you or take away. It was something you carried, something you protected, something you never, ever surrendered, no matter who was demanding it or why. The seatbelt sign stayed on. The plane climbed through turbulence, and Marcus Sterling closed his eyes and tried not to think about how 36 hours could feel both infinite and gone. 10:02. They'd been airborne for 17 minutes when Captain Hayes' voice returned to the intercom, and this time the smooth authority had curdled into something harder. "Folks, this is the captain again. We've got a bit of a situation here. Looks like we're overweight on this flight, and I need 4 volunteers to deplane. We're offering a $400 travel voucher plus a hotel room and rebooking on the 6 a.m. flight tomorrow. If you're interested, please press your call button and a flight attendant will assist you." Silence. The kind of silence that happens when a crowd collectively decides that someone else can be the hero. Marcus opened his eyes, looked around. No call buttons lit. No volunteers materializing. The plane had 217 passengers, and exactly 0 of them wanted to spend the night in a Chicago airport hotel for $400 that would probably come with more restrictions than a mob informant in witness protection. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Captain Hayes again, voice tighter now. "All right, folks. Since we don't have volunteers, we're going to have to select passengers involuntarily based on our boarding algorithm. Flight attendants, please check your tablets." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not panic, not yet. Just recognition. The sense that something was about to happen, something that would require the kind of careful calibration he usually reserved for depositions and contract negotiations. He pulled out his phone, navigated to the federal aviation regulations he'd bookmarked. Section 250.5. Waited. Jennifer Walsh appeared at row 28, tablet in hand, face professionally neutral. She stopped, looked at the tablet, looked at Marcus, looked back at the tablet like it might have changed its mind in the interim. "Sir?" Her voice had that careful modulation flight attendants use when they're about to deliver bad news and want to make it sound like they're doing you a favor. "I'm so sorry, but you've been selected to deplane." Marcus met her eyes, kept his voice calm, professional, the voice he used in courtrooms when opposing counsel was trying to rattle him. "I've already boarded. Federal Aviation Regulation Part 250 states that once a passenger has boarded and been seated, involuntary denied boarding requires different protocols than gate denial. The compensation structure is different. The airline's obligations are different." Jennifer blinked. Clearly, this wasn't the response she'd expected. Passengers were supposed to comply. Grumble maybe, but ultimately gather their things and trudge back up the aisle in defeat. They weren't supposed to cite regulations. "Sir, the computer selected you based on our algorithm. Check-in time, fare class, frequent flyer status. It's all automated." "I checked in 3 hours ago through your mobile app. I have the timestamp." Marcus held up his phone. "My fare class is standard economy, paid in full, not a discounted ticket." "I understand the airline needs to address weight distribution, but selecting a passenger who's already boarded requires just compensation under federal law, and I need to see my dying mother in Washington. So I'm respectfully declining your request to deplane." The toddler chose that moment to start crying again, a sound that seemed to fill every available cubic inch of cabin space. The cologne man stirred in his sleep. Jennifer's professional mask cracked slightly, revealing something underneath. Irritation, maybe, or the exhaustion that comes from dealing with difficult passengers on the 200th flight of the month. "Sir, I need to get the captain." She walked away before Marcus could respond. He watched her navigate the aisle, watched her lean into the cockpit, watched her gesture back toward row 28, watched Captain Robert Hayes emerge from behind the flight deck door, all silver hair and gold bars, and the kind of confidence that comes from 3 decades of being the authority in an aluminum tube at 30,000 feet. Hayes walked down the aisle like he owned it, stopped at row 28, looked down at Marcus with eyes that had made the calculation in seconds. Hoodie, jeans, black man, seat 28B equals problem. Captain Hayes planted his feet in the aisle and crossed his arms, a posture that would look ridiculous anywhere but a pressurized metal tube where he was, technically, the supreme authority. His voice came out loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear, deliberate projection, making sure everyone understood who was in charge. "On my aircraft, I am the law." He paused, letting it hang there, waiting for Marcus to recognize the power differential. "You have 60 seconds to gather your belongings and deplane, or I will have security remove you." Marcus kept his voice level, no rising inflection, no challenge in the tone, just stating facts in the same way he'd explain contract law to a first-year associate. "Captain, I'm traveling to see my mother. She's in end-stage cancer at a hospital in Washington. The doctors say I have maybe 36 hours. I paid $1,200 for this seat. I checked in properly, boarded properly, and I'm seated. I'm not refusing to comply with a lawful order. I'm asking you to find another passenger who hasn't yet boarded, or to address this weight issue through cargo adjustment, or to offer compensation sufficient to make voluntary deplaning worth someone's while. $400 for a night in a Chicago hotel and a 6 a.m. flight that might also be overbooked isn't compensation. It's an insult." Something flickered across Hayes' face. Not sympathy. Recognition, maybe. The recognition that this wasn't going to be simple. That the man in 28B had just demonstrated he understood the regulations better than most passengers. Better than most flight attendants. Possibly better than Hayes himself. But recognition didn't mean capitulation. It meant escalation. I don't care about your mother. Hayes' voice dropped lower, intimate cruelty. I don't care about your ticket. I don't care about anything except the fact that you're disrupting my flight. 60 seconds started 30 seconds ago. Clocks ticking. The cabin had gone quiet. That special quality of silence that happens when strangers sense drama unfolding and collectively stop whatever they're doing to watch. Marcus could feel eyes on him, could hear someone 2 rows up whisper to their seatmate, could see phones coming out, discreet at first, then more obvious as passengers realized this was becoming something worth documenting. Captain Hayes. Marcus kept his hands visible, relaxed on the armrests, body language broadcasting calm compliance, even as his words carved out space to resist. I'm giving you one last chance to de-escalate this situation. I'm not being disruptive. I'm asking questions, which is my right. I'm citing federal regulations which govern your authority, and I'm requesting that you follow proper protocol for involuntary denied boarding, which includes written explanation of my rights and compensation that reflects the actual inconvenience being imposed. If you choose to remove me by force, that's your decision. But I want you to know that I'm not resisting. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm sitting in a seat I paid for, asking to get to my dying mother. Whatever happens next is on you. Hayes' face flushed. A vein appeared at his temple, visible even in the cabin's dim lighting. For a man who'd spent 3 decades being unquestioned authority, having someone calmly, methodically, publicly challenge that authority was probably the worst thing Marcus could have done. Worse than yelling. Worse than throwing a tantrum. Because yelling and tantrums confirm that the passenger is the problem. Calm, reasoned resistance suggests that maybe, just maybe, the captain is. Are you threatening me? Hayes' voice climbed half an octave. I'm warning you that you're making a mistake. Security! Hayes wheeled toward the front of the aircraft. Flight attendants, call airport police. We have a disruptive passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose, pulled out his phone, opened the video camera, hit record, aimed it at his own face, then panned to show Hayes, Jennifer Walsh hovering nervously behind the captain, the surrounding passengers with their phones already out. For the record, Marcus said quietly, speaking to the camera but knowing everyone could hear. My name is Marcus Sterling. It's 10:14 p.m. on Tuesday, November 12, 2024. I'm a passenger on Skywing Flight 373, Seat 28B. I boarded legally, paid full fare, and I'm seated. Captain Robert Hayes has just threatened to remove me by force because I asked questions about the airline's involuntary deplaning procedures. I am not resisting. I am not being disruptive. I am sitting in my assigned seat trying to get to my dying mother in Washington, D.C. What happens next is being done to me, not by me. He stopped recording, saved the video, texted it to Nathan Hayes with a message, backup, might need legal assist, O'Hare. Then he waited. The plane's door was still closed. They hadn't pushed back from the gate yet. The weight issue had stopped them before taxi, which meant airport police could board without requiring the jet bridge to reconnect. Small mercy. It also meant this was all happening on the ground, in Illinois, under state and federal jurisdiction that Marcus knew intimately because corporate law often intersected with transportation law, and he'd made it his business to understand every relevant statute. 7 minutes. That's how long it took for Officer Daniel Mitchell to board the aircraft, flanked by a younger partner whose name tag read Officer Stevens. Mitchell was maybe 39, 40, with the build of someone who'd played football in college and hadn't quite let go of the conditioning. His eyes scanned the cabin with practiced efficiency before settling on row 28. Sir, Mitchell's voice was professional, almost bored, the tone of someone who'd done this exact thing 200 times before. We need you to come with us. Marcus looked up at him, made sure his hands stayed visible on the armrests, made sure his voice stayed calm. Officer, I'd like to understand what law I'm alleged to have broken. Mitchell's jaw tightened fractionally. Captain says you're refusing to deplane. That's interfering with the flight crew. Federal offense. I haven't refused anything. I've asked questions. I've cited relevant regulations. I've explained that I paid for this seat and need to get to a family emergency. But if the captain insists I leave, I'll leave voluntarily. I just need to get my bag from under the seat. Marcus started to lean forward, started to reach for the duffel. Mitchell's hand shot out and grabbed his arm, fingers digging into the hoodie fabric, yanking upward with enough force to pull Marcus halfway out of the seat.
"Don't move." "I'm not," Marcus started to say, but Mitchell's partner was already moving, pulling plastic zip-tie handcuffs from his belt, and everything accelerated in that terrible, slow-motion clarity where you see each individual frame but can't stop the sequence. The cuffs went on too tight. Marcus felt the plastic bite into his wrists, felt circulation cut off immediately, the kind of tight that goes from uncomfortable to painful in seconds. He opened his mouth to say the cuffs are too tight, please loosen them, but Mitchell was already pulling him upward, and the angle was wrong, and Marcus's shoulder screamed, and his head came up too fast and connected with the metal edge of the overhead bin with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the pressurized silence. Pain. White-hot, electric, radiating from his left temple down through his jaw. He tasted copper. Blood in his mouth. Felt something warm running down the side of his face. The cabin tilted. Or maybe he tilted. Hard to tell. Mitchell and Stevens were dragging him now, literally dragging, his feet barely touching the floor, his body a weight they were hauling up the aisle, while passengers pressed back in their seats like they could somehow avoid contamination by proximity. The toddler was screaming. Someone else was yelling. A woman's voice, high and frightened. "He's bleeding! He wasn't doing anything, and he's bleeding!" Marcus tried to find his footing, tried to walk so they wouldn't have to drag him. But his legs wouldn't cooperate, and his vision was doing strange things, tunneling at the edges, and the carpet burned against his shins where his jeans had ridden up an exposed skin. The smell of recycled air and cleaning fluid, and something else, something metallic and wrong. They reached the front of the aircraft, the jet bridge, the door. Mitchell and Stevens pulled him through like he was cargo, no consideration for the fact that he was a human being with joints that bent in specific directions, and a head that was bleeding, and hands that had gone numb from the cuffs. They dropped him on the industrial carpet of the jet bridge. Just dropped him. Marcus hit hard, shoulder first, head snapping to the side, new explosion of pain. He lay there, stared at the fluorescent lights overhead, watched them blur and separate and recombine, tried to remember what he'd been doing before this, tried to remember why any of it mattered. Someone was talking. Mitchell, maybe. Reading him rights. Something about trespassing. Something about interfering with flight crew operations. Federal charges. Marcus heard the words, but they slid off his consciousness like water off glass. Everything hurt. His wrists, his head, his shoulder, his ribs where they'd pressed against the armrest on that first violent pull. Everything. He turned his head, slow, careful, and saw through the small window in the jet bridge door. Saw Captain Robert Hayes standing in the cockpit doorway, arms crossed, watching. Their eyes met. Hayes's face was satisfied, victorious, the look of a man who'd defended his territory and won. Marcus held that gaze, tried to make sure Hayes saw him, really saw him, saw the blood running down the side of his face, saw the way his hands had turned purple where the cuffs cut off circulation, saw the calm in Marcus's eyes despite everything, the absolute certainty that this wasn't over, couldn't be over, wouldn't be over. He moved his lips, formed words. No sound came out, but the shape was clear enough for anyone reading lips. "You have no idea who I am." Then Mitchell was hauling him upright again, Stevens grabbing the other arm,
and they were walking him down the jet bridge toward the terminal, toward the security office, toward whatever came next. Behind them, the aircraft door closed. The plane that would take off without him. The flight he'd paid $1,200 to board. The seat he'd been dragged from like trash. Marcus Sterling, senior partner of Sterling and Hayes Law, managing director of a $300 million private equity fund, holder of $650 million in Skywing Airlines debt, walked between two police officers with his head bleeding and his hands cuffed, and his mother dying 300 miles away. And somewhere in his lawyer brain, past the pain and exhaustion and rage, a small, cold voice was already calculating, already running numbers, already pulling up contract clauses and federal statutes, and the precise mechanisms by which you dismantle a corporation that has wronged you. But that would come later. For now, there was just the blood and the fluorescent lights, and the taste of copper, and the knowledge that somewhere in Washington, his mother was dying without him. The holding cell at O'Hare smelled like industrial disinfectant, failing to mask decades of human desperation. Marcus sat on a metal bench bolted to concrete block walls, his hands finally free of the zip ties, but bearing deep purple grooves where the plastic had carved temporary canyons into his wrists. A paramedic had cleaned the gash on his temple, butterfly bandages, no stitches needed, they'd said, though the throbbing suggested otherwise. And now he was alone, except for Officer Mitchell, typing up a report at a desk 15 feet away, hunting and pecking at a keyboard like he was defusing a bomb, one letter at a time. 10:47 p.m. His mother had been alive for 10:47 p.m. worth of minutes since he'd gotten the call this morning, and he was sitting in a cell at O'Hare instead of holding her hand in Washington. Marcus pressed his palms against his temples, careful to avoid the bandage, and tried to calculate how many hours he had left. The doctors had said 36. That was 17 hours ago. 19 hours remaining. Maybe less. Maybe she was already gone, and nobody had thought to call him because he was in a holding cell with no phone, no wallet, no way to contact anyone. Mitchell finished typing, swiveled his chair around. You get one phone call. Make it count. Marcus stood. His ribs screamed where they'd compressed against the armrest. He walked to the desk, moving carefully, and Mitchell handed him a desk phone with a coiled cord that belonged in a museum. Marcus dialed from memory. Mathan's personal cell. The one that rang through even at midnight because lawyers who managed $300 million didn't get the luxury of being unreachable. 3 rings. 4. Then Nathan's voice, alert despite the hour, already shifting into crisis management mode because nobody called at 10:47 unless something had broken. Marcus? What? Where are you? Marcus kept his voice level, professional, the same tone he used when explaining to clients that their brilliant acquisition strategy had just exposed them to $17 million in unexpected liability. Nathan, I'm at O'Hare. Airport police. There was an incident on the flight. Silence. Nathan processing. Then quieter. Are you hurt? Superficial. Head wound, bandaged. I'm fine. But I need you to do something, and I need you to do it without asking questions until it's done. Nathan knew that tone. That was the tone Marcus used right before he demolished opposing counsel in a deposition. I'm listening. Marcus closed his eyes, saw Captain Hayes' satisfied face through the jet bridge window, saw Jennifer Walsh's careful neutrality as she'd stood by and watched, saw the algorithm that had selected him specifically, not the white businessman in 14C or the soccer mom in 9A or any of the 100 other passengers who might have been easier targets, saw the pattern he'd spent 42 years learning to recognize, the pattern that said, your presence here is conditional, temporary, revocable at any moment we decide you don't fit. Execute the liquidity clause, Skywing Airlines, the full $650 million. I want a notice of default and acceleration delivered to their corporate headquarters and their counsel before markets open tomorrow. 24-hour cure period starting at 6 a.m. Eastern. If they can't post cash collateral by Friday at 5 p.m., file for involuntary bankruptcy. The silence stretched longer this time. Marcus could hear Nathan breathing, could imagine him in his Lincoln Park townhouse, probably in his home office, probably already pulling up the Skywing contracts on his laptop, because that's what Nathan did when clients made requests that would reshape entire industries. Jesus, Marcus, that's nuclear. The stock will crater. They employ 40,000 people. Are you absolutely... And leak the default notice to the Wall Street Journal. I want it published before trading opens. I want their stock in free fall by 9:31 a.m. I want every analyst on the street writing obituaries by lunch. More silence. Then Nathan's voice, very quiet. What did they do to you? Marcus opened his eyes, looked at Mitchell, who was pretending not to listen while obviously listening. Lowered his voice. They dragged me off the plane by force. Handcuffs tight enough to cut circulation. Slammed my head into an overhead bin. Blood. 200 witnesses. All of it on video. And they did it because I asked questions and cited regulations and didn't look like I belonged in the seat I'd paid $1,200 to occupy. I'll have a team there in 20 minutes. We'll handle the criminal charges. Get you... No. Marcus cut him off. I don't need criminal defense. These charges are harassment. They'll evaporate once Skywing's lawyers realize what's about to hit them. What I need is the liquidity clause executed. Now. Tonight. Every minute you spend talking to me is a minute you're not drafting that notice. Nathan exhaled, a sound that Marcus recognized as capitulation mixed with concern, mixed with the thrill that comes from deploying legal weapons of mass destruction. Okay, I'm on it. But Marcus, your mother, the hospital, how are you going to... There's a 6 a.m. flight. If I'm out of here by 4, I can make it. Just execute the clause. He hung up before Nathan could argue, handed the phone back to Mitchell, who took it with an expression suggesting he'd heard more than he wanted to hear, but not quite enough to understand what he'd heard. You get a lawyer coming? Marcus sat back down on the bench. Something like that. 11:03. Somewhere in Washington, his mother was breathing. Or not breathing. Existing in whatever liminal space separates dying from dead. And Marcus was stuck in Illinois, waiting for bureaucracy to process him through its digestive system, so he could be released and try again, and maybe, if he was lucky, if the universe decided to extend him a fraction of the mercy it had denied him all evening, get there before she slipped away entirely. He thought about the first time she'd explained racism to him. He'd been 7, second grade, came home crying because a teacher had accused him of cheating on a spelling test. 25 words, all correct, and apparently that was suspicious for a black kid from the South Side. Dorothy Sterling had sat him down at their kitchen table, the one with the chipped formica and the wobbly leg they'd shimmed with folded cardboard, and explained in language a 7-year-old could understand that some people would always doubt him. Always assume he hadn't earned what he'd achieved. Always find reasons to believe he didn't belong. So what do I do? He'd asked, tears still hot on his face. She'd taken his hands in hers, those strong, gentle hands. You be so good they can't ignore you. You be so prepared they can't dismiss you. And when they still try, because baby, they will still try, you make them pay for underestimating you. Marcus had built an entire career on that advice. Graduated top of his class at Northwestern Law, made partner at 34, built Sterling and Hayes into a firm that Fortune 500 companies called when they needed problems solved quietly and permanently. Managed a fund that could move markets with a single decision. Became so good, so prepared, that most people didn't dare underestimate him. But some people never learned. Some people looked at a hoodie and jeans and a black face and saw an algorithm-selected target. Saw someone they could drag off a plane with impunity. Saw a problem to be removed rather than a person with rights and resources and the capacity to burn their entire world down. Captain Robert Hayes had no idea what he'd done. Not yet. but he would. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 11:15. 11:30. Mitchell finished his report, printed it, made Marcus sign acknowledgement that he'd been informed of the charges: criminal trespass, interfering with flight crew operations, failure to comply with lawful order. All federal offenses. All carrying potential jail time. Marcus signed without reading because the charges were performance art, theater for a system that required documentation before it could release him. 11:45. A different officer appeared, older, with sergeant stripes and the exhausted competence of someone who'd seen enough holding cell drama to recognize which arrestees were actual threats and which were just people caught in bureaucratic machinery. He reviewed the paperwork, looked at Marcus, looked back at the paperwork. "Mr. Sterling, you're being released on your own recognizance. Court date will be mailed to the address on your ID. You'll need to collect your belongings at the desk." Marcus stood. His body protested, ribs, shoulder, head, all competing to see which could generate the most pain. He followed the sergeant down a corridor of institutional beige, through a door that required 3 different keys, into a processing area where his duffel bag sat on a counter looking forlorn, and somehow smaller than he remembered. He signed for it, checked the contents. Everything still there, though someone had been through it. Clothes refolded incorrectly. Toiletries rearranged. Looking for what? Drugs? Weapons? Evidence that he was more than he appeared? Marcus shouldered the bag and walked out into the terminal. Midnight. O'Hare at midnight was a landscape of after-hours capitalism, closed shops and empty gates, and janitors pushing industrial buffers across floors that would be scuffed again by 6 a.m. Marcus found a restroom, looked at himself in the mirror under fluorescent lights that made everyone look like extras in a zombie film. The butterfly bandages on his temple looked obscene, too white against his skin, stock evidence of violence rendered medical. His hoodie had a small tear at the shoulder. His jeans bore carpet burns at the knees. He looked like someone who'd been dragged off a plane, which was exactly what he was. Marcus washed his face carefully, avoiding the wound, dried off with paper towels that felt like sandpaper, pulled out his phone, they'd returned it with his belongings, and saw 17 missed calls from Nathan, 3 from his assistant, 2 from numbers he didn't recognize. He ignored them all and checked the airline app. Skywing Flight 373 had departed at 11:02 p.m., 47 minutes late, and was currently somewhere over Indiana. In 3 hours it would land in Washington. Passengers would deplane, collect their bags, disperse into the night. Life would continue as if nothing had happened. Except something had happened. 217 people had watched a man get dragged off a plane. Most of them had filmed it. And by now, Marcus checked Twitter, searched Skywing. By now, those videos were metastasizing across the internet. The first one he found had been posted by user @JessicaTravels, timestamp 11:38 p.m. A 16-year-old girl, her profile said. High school junior from Connecticut. The video was shaky but clear enough. Marcus sitting in 28B, Captain Hayes looming. Words Marcus couldn't quite hear, but could see himself speaking. Then the officers, the handcuffs, the violent extraction, the blood. Caption: Hashtag, Skywing just beat up a passenger for no reason. WTF. Retweets, 4,872. Likes, 8,341. Comments, 1,203, and climbing. Marcus scrolled through the comments. Most were outraged, some were skeptical. There must be more to the story. He must have done something. Airlines don't just drag people off planes. A few were explicitly racist, saying things Marcus had learned to ignore, because letting them land meant letting them wound. But the ratio was shifting in real time. More retweets, more likes, more videos from different angles emerging as other passengers posted their footage. By 12:15 a.m., there were 6 different videos circulating. By 12:30, 15. By 1 a.m., the hashtag boycott Skywing was trending in Chicago. By 1:30, it was trending nationally. Marcus sat in a terminal chair and watched his assault go viral. Watched strangers dissect the video frame by frame, analyzing body language, reading lips, building consensus that yes, this was wrong, unequivocally wrong, the kind of wrong that demanded accountability. He should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt numb. Because none of those videos showed what came before.
The security screening. The gate agent's suspicion. Jennifer Walsh's careful verification of his seat. The accumulation of small doubts that added up to a conclusion. This person doesn't belong here. 1:45 a.m. Marcus's phone buzzed. Nathan. It's done. Notice drafted, delivered to Skywing's registered agent in Dallas at 1:30 a.m. Central. Their counsel will have it by 2. Journal got the leak at 1:15. They're running it in the morning edition. Markets open in 7 hours and 45 minutes. Are you somewhere safe? Marcus looked around the empty terminal. Define safe. Marcus. Nathan's voice carried weight now, the kind that comes from 20 years of partnership and genuine concern. What happened on that plane? You'll see it soon enough. It's all over Twitter. I've seen it. Everyone's seen it. Jesus Christ, Marcus, your face, the blood, and they're still charging you? Charges won't stick. Skywing's lawyers will make them disappear once they realize what's coming. Right now, I need to focus on getting to Washington. There's a 6 a.m. flight. I already booked you a seat. First class, different airline. Confirmation number in your email. Marcus felt something crack in his chest, a hairline fracture in the armor he'd maintained since Mitchell grabbed his arm. Nathan had booked him first class on a different airline, had thought about the fact that Marcus might not want to fly Skywing again, might not want to risk another confrontation, might need the psychological safety of knowing he wouldn't be dragged from his seat. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. When the market opens, this gets ugly. Skywing stock was at $42 at close. After hours trading has it at $37. By 9:31, I'm guessing single digits. We're going to get calls. Lots of calls. Board members, shareholders, journalists. Everyone's going to want to know why we're torpedoing a company that employs 40,000 people. Tell them we're enforcing contract terms. Material adverse change, operational disruption, loss of public confidence, all valid triggers for the liquidity clause. Marcus, they're going to say we're doing this because of what happened to you personally. We are doing this because of what happened to me personally. Marcus kept his voice flat, lawyer neutral. But that doesn't make it illegal or unethical or wrong. They breached operational standards. They created a viral public relations crisis. They exposed the company to massive liability. All of that constitutes material adverse change under Section 4.2 of the bond agreement. We'd be failing our fiduciary duty to the fund if we didn't protect our position. Nathan was quiet for a moment, then softer. Your mother, how is she? I don't know. I haven't been able to call the hospital. I'll try from the gate. Marcus, if you need to step back from this, let me handle the Skywing situation. No, I need to do this. I need to watch them understand what they've done. I'll call you from D.C. He hung up, pulled up the hospital number from his contacts, dialed, got transferred twice before reaching the oncology ward, where a nurse with a kind voice told him that Dorothy Sterling was resting comfortably, that her vitals were stable for now, that the doctor would be doing rounds at 7 a.m. and could provide a more detailed update then. Can I talk to her? She's heavily sedated, Mr. Sterling. I don't think she'd be able to respond. But you can try. A pause. Rustling. Then a phone being held near his mother's ear, and Marcus said the words anyway, because maybe some part of her could still hear. Maybe some fragment of consciousness was still tethered enough to know he was coming. Mom, it's Marcus. I'm sorry I'm not there yet. There was a situation with the flight. But I'm getting on another plane in 4 hours. I'll be there by 9 a.m. Just hold on. Please. Hold on. Silence. Just the ambient sound of hospital equipment beeping and breathing for patients who couldn't quite manage it themselves. Then the nurse's voice, gentle. "I'll let the doctors know you're coming." Marcus ended the call, sat in the terminal chair with his duffel at his feet and his head throbbing and 4 hours to kill before boarding. He opened his laptop, connected to airport Wi-Fi,
Pulled up the Skywing bond documents and started reviewing every clause, every provision, every word of fine print he'd negotiated 3 years ago, when the airline had been desperate for capital and willing to accept terms that gave creditors extraordinary power in exchange for money they needed to stay airborne. Section 4.2. Material adverse change. Any event or circumstance that could reasonably be expected to have a material adverse effect on the business, operations, properties, assets, or condition of the company. Section 5.1. Financial covenants. Company shall maintain minimum liquidity of not less than $400 million. Section 7.3. Events of default. Upon occurrence of an event of default, the trustee, or the holders of not less than 25% in principal amount of the notes then outstanding, may declare all the notes to be immediately due and payable. It was all there. The architecture of destruction, built into the contract, waiting to be activated. Marcus had written these clauses thinking they'd never be used. That was the point of nuclear weapons. You built them as deterrents, not as tools. But deterrents only worked if both sides understood the stakes. Captain Hayes hadn't understood. Neither had Jennifer Walsh or Sharon Mills or any of the people who'd looked at Marcus Sterling in his hoodie and jeans and seen someone they could discard without consequence. They were about to learn differently. 3 a.m. The terminal started to show signs of life. Early morning travelers appearing like ghosts, pulling roller bags, clutching coffee cups, moving through the space with that glazed determination of people who'd rather be sleeping but had places to be. Marcus watched them, wondered how many had seen the videos, how many recognized him. Nobody approached. Nobody made eye contact. In a terminal full of strangers, he remained invisible except as content, as the subject of a viral video they'd scroll past while waiting for their own flights. 4 a.m. Marcus checked Twitter again. The videos had jumped to 89 million cumulative views. Hashtag boycott Skywing was trending #1 globally, ahead of a presidential press conference and a celebrity divorce. News outlets were picking it up. CNN had run a segment, so had BBC, Al Jazeera, every major network finding ways to frame the story. Airline violence, passenger rights, racial profiling, corporate accountability. The narratives multiplied and diverged, but they all started from the same footage. A man in a hoodie getting dragged down an aisle, bleeding. 4:30. Marcus made his way to the gate for the 6 a.m. flight. Different concourse, different airline, different energy entirely. The gate agent, a young black woman with natural hair and a name tag reading Keisha, smiled when he approached. "Good morning. Heading to D.C.?" Marcus handed her his phone with the boarding pass displayed. She scanned it. Green beep. No hesitation, no suspicious looks, no calling a supervisor. "You're all set, Mr. Sterling. First class, seat 2A. We'll be boarding in about 45 minutes. He found a chair near the window, watched the sky lighten from black to deep blue to that pre-dawn gray that makes everything look uncertain and temporary. His phone buzzed constantly, news alerts, Twitter notifications, missed calls from numbers that resolved to journalists when he checked them. Marcus ignored them all. Let the attention build. Let the pressure accumulate. There would be time later for statements and interviews and the careful construction of narrative. Right now, he just needed to get to Washington. 5:45. Boarding began. Marcus walked onto the plane, found his seat, stowed his bag. The flight attendant, older white woman, maybe 60, brought him orange juice without being asked. "Anything else I can get you before takeoff?" "No, thank you." She moved on. No second glances, no verification of his seat. Just standard first-class service. The kind that assumes passengers belong where they're sitting
because first class is where people who can afford first class sit. Marcus had paid the same for seat 28B on Skywing. The difference wasn't the ticket price. It was the assumptions that came with the seating chart. 6:07. The plane pushed back. 6:23. They were airborne. Marcus tilted his seat back, closed his eyes, and tried to sleep. Couldn't. His mind kept replaying the moment Mitchell grabbed his arm. The crack of his head against metal. The sound Captain Hayes' voice had made when he'd said, "I am the law." The casual certainty that he could do this, that the system would back him, that there would be no consequences. 7:30. The pilot announced their descent into Reagan National. Marcus opened his laptop, checked the Wall Street Journal, front page, below the fold. Skywing faces liquidity crisis as major creditor calls debt. The article was sparse on details. Corporate debt structures weren't sexy journalism, but it laid out the basics. $650 million in bonds, 24-hour cure period. If Skywing couldn't post collateral by Friday evening, involuntary bankruptcy proceedings would begin. Marcus checked the stock price. Markets had been open for 38 minutes. Skywing was trading at $8.73, down from $42 at yesterday's close, down 79%. Nearly $17 billion in market capitalization evaporated overnight. The kind of crash that would trigger circuit breakers and emergency board meetings and CEOs getting fired before lunch. 8:14. They landed. Marcus deplaned, collected his duffel, and caught a taxi to the hospital. The driver recognized him from the videos. Marcus could see it in the rearview mirror glances, but didn't say anything, just drove. Arrived at 8:53. The hospital was exactly what hospitals always were. Fluorescent lights and linoleum and the smell of antiseptic trying to mask decay. Marcus found the oncology ward, gave his name at the desk. A nurse, different from the one he'd spoken to on the phone, led him down a corridor of doors that all looked the same, stopped at 412. "She's been in and out of consciousness. The doctor will be here in about 20 minutes to discuss next steps." Marcus nodded, pushed open the door. His mother lay in a bed that seemed too large for her diminished frame, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and measured the distance between living and not. She'd always been small, 5'2", maybe 100 pounds in her prime, but cancer had reduced her to something nearly translucent, skin pulled tight over bone, veins visible like rivers on a map. Her eyes were closed, an oxygen cannula traced across her face. IV lines snaked into her arms. Marcus set his duffel down, pulled a chair close to the bed, took her hand in his. It felt like paper and bird bones, fragile enough to crumble. "Mom, it's Marcus. I'm here." Her eyelids fluttered, opened halfway, took a moment to focus, then recognition sparked, and her lips moved, forming words that barely had sound behind them. "Baby, you made it." "I made it." "You look terrible." Marcus laughed, a sound that hurt his ribs. "Rough flight." She squeezed his hand with strength that shouldn't have been possible, given how little of her remained. "Tell me." So he did. Not everything. Not the full scope of what he'd set in motion, the corporate demolition currently underway, the careers that would end, and the stock that would crater, and the 40,000 employees who'd wake up Monday morning wondering if they still had jobs. Just the basics. The flight, the selection, the confrontation, the violence. He left out the blood, tried to minimize the injury, but Dorothy Sterling had been reading her son's face for 42 years, and she wasn't fooled. "They hurt you." They did. "What are you going to do about it?" Marcus looked at their joined hands. His mother's hand, which had held his through childhood nightmares and first days of school and law school graduation.
which had worked so many years at the print shop that the fingers bore permanent ink stains in the whorls and creases, which had taught him that dignity wasn't negotiable and justice wasn't optional, and sometimes the only way to stop a system from crushing you was to break the system first. I'm going to make them understand what they've done. To me, to everyone who looks like me, to every person they've decided doesn't belong in seats they paid for. Dorothy's eyes closed, opened again. Something like satisfaction crossed her face. Good. Don't let them get away with it. Promise me. I promise. And Marcus? Her voice was fading now, strength depleted by the conversation. Don't lose yourself in the revenge. Remember who you are. Remember what I taught you. Be so good they can't ignore you? Be so good they can't ignore you. And when they still try, make them pay for underestimating you. But baby, she squeezed his hand again, weaker this time. Don't become them. Don't let the fight turn you into something you're not. You hear me? I hear you. She smiled, closed her eyes. Her breathing evened out into something that might have been sleep, or might have been unconsciousness, or might have been the slow slide toward whatever came next. Marcus sat with her, held her hand, watched the machines measure her life in digital increments. The doctor arrived at 9:20, explained what Marcus already knew: days, maybe hours, comfort measures only, nothing more they could do. Marcus nodded through it, signed the paperwork that needed signing, authorized the morphine increases that would ease her passage, but accelerate the timeline. Made the only choice there was to make. 9:45. Marcus's phone buzzed. Nathan. He stepped into the hallway to take it. You need to see this. Skywing just released a statement. Marcus pulled up his email, found the press release Nathan had forwarded, read it twice to make sure he was understanding correctly. Skywing Airlines regrets the incident aboard Flight 373 on November 12th. We are conducting a full investigation into the circumstances surrounding passenger Marcus Sterling's removal from the aircraft. The employees involved have been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of our review. We are committed to treating all passengers with dignity and respect, and we take these allegations seriously. Administrative leave. Not fired, not arrested, not held accountable in any meaningful way, just administrative leave. That corporate purgatory where problem employees vanished until the news cycle moved on and they could be quietly reinstated. Marcus walked back into his mother's room, sat down, picked up his phone, called Nathan back. Tell me about the liquidity clause. Where are we? Skywing received the notice at 2 a.m. Their lawyers called our office at 6. Thomas Reed, the CEO, called me personally at 7:30. He's panicking, wants to negotiate, offering settlement, public apology, termination of employees. He'll agree to almost anything if we withdraw the acceleration. What did you tell him? That I'd relay the message to you. Marcus, they're offering $5 million. That's $5 million is what I bill in a good year. It's not compensation, it's an insult. What's the stock at now? 6.23. Still falling. Every analyst on the street is writing obituaries. Bondholders are dumping. Credit rating agencies are reviewing for downgrade. If we push this through Friday, they're done. Bankruptcy, liquidation. 40,000 people lose their jobs. Marcus looked at his mother, at the machines keeping her alive, at the dignity they'd tried to preserve by covering her with a blanket, even though she was too far gone to feel cold. Thought about Linda Patterson, the junior flight attendant who'd tried to warn him, who probably had a family and a mortgage and a life that would crater when Skywing imploded. Thought about the baggage handlers and gate agents and mechanics who'd done nothing wrong except work for a company with a broken culture. Thought about Captain Robert Hayes, who'd looked at Marcus and seen something disposable, who'd given an order that resulted in blood and handcuffs and humiliation, who is probably at home right now on administrative leave with full pay, telling himself he'd just been doing his job. Don't withdraw the acceleration. Let it run. I want them in bankruptcy court by Monday. Marcus, they had a choice, Nathan. At every step, they had a choice. The gate agent could have scanned my pass without suspicion. The flight attendant could have left me alone. The captain could have found another solution. The officers could have let me gather my bag.
Every single person in that chain had a chance to see me as human and chose not to. So no settlement, no negotiation. I want the full weight of consequences they've been dodging for years. Silence. Then Nathan, very quiet. This is going to get ugly. It already is ugly. I'm just making sure everyone can see it. Marcus hung up, sat with his mother as the morphine pulled her deeper into whatever dreams or memories or absences filled the space between alive and not. Held her hand, watched the numbers on the monitors climb and fall and stabilize and fail. She died at 2:37 p.m. on Wednesday, November 13th, with Marcus sitting beside her, exactly 19 hours after he'd gotten the first call saying she had 36 hours left. The doctor came in, confirmed what the monitors had already announced, offered condolences that meant nothing because there was nothing anyone could say that would make this bearable. Marcus sat with her body for another hour, not because he believed she was still there, he didn't, but because leaving felt like abandonment, and he'd already failed to get there in time, and sitting was the only thing he could still do for her. 3:45. A nurse came in, gentle but firm, explaining they needed to process the remains, that Marcus should take whatever personal items he wanted, that the funeral home he'd designated would be contacted. Marcus nodded, gathered his mother's reading glasses from the bedside table, her wedding ring, which she'd worn for 30 years after his father died, because taking it off felt like erasing him. Her book, a thriller she'd never finish, bookmark still tucked at page 247. He walked out of the hospital into Washington afternoon sunshine that felt like mockery. Called Nathan. She's gone. Jesus, Marcus, I'm so sorry. I need you to do something. The Skywing situation. Find out everything, not just the flight, everything. Complaint records, past incidents, patterns. I want to know if what happened to me has happened to others. I want documentation, evidence, the kind of thing that stands up in court and in congressional hearings. You're thinking class action? I'm thinking systematic discrimination. I'm thinking corporate culture that enabled this. I'm thinking federal investigation into hiring practices and training protocols, and whether Skywing has been violating civil rights law for years. But first, I need the data. I'm on it. Marcus, take a few days. Deal with your mother's funeral. We can handle the Skywing collapse from here. No, I need to see this through. I'll be back in Chicago tomorrow. Schedule a board meeting for Friday afternoon. I want every partner there. We're going to discuss next steps. He ended the call, stood on the sidewalk outside the hospital, checked Twitter. Hashtag boycott Skywing was still trending. The videos had surpassed 200 million views. News coverage had expanded, senators calling for investigations, consumer advocates demanding reform, Skywing's competitors seizing the opportunity to advertise their superior customer service. And somewhere in Dallas, in a corner office with a view of the tarmac, Thomas Reed was probably looking at a stock chart showing his company's death in real time and wondering how a routine overbooking situation had metastasized into corporate apocalypse. Marcus hailed a cab, gave the address for a hotel near the airport. He'd stay the night, fly back to Chicago in the morning, bury his mother next week. And then he'd finish what Skywing had started when they decided a black man in a hoodie didn't deserve the seat he'd paid for. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that makes Chicago look like a film noir establishing shot. Marcus landed at O'Hare at 7:43 a.m. on a different airline, walked through the same terminal where he'd been arrested 48 hours earlier, and felt nothing. Not anger, not vindication. just the hollow weight that comes from burying grief under work, because work at least had actionable steps and measurable outcomes. Nathan met him at baggage claim, which was unusual enough to signal crisis. Partners didn't do airport pickups. They sent associates or car services or expected you to manage your own logistics. But Nathan stood there holding 2 coffees from the good place on Michigan Avenue, the one that charged $8 for espresso because they could. And his face carried the expression of someone who'd spent the night reading documents that changed his understanding of the world. "You look like hell." Marcus took the coffee. "I feel worse." "What did you find?" They walked to Nathan's Audi in the short-term parking, didn't speak until they were sealed inside with the engine running and the heat blasting away the November chill. Then Nathan pulled a tablet from his briefcase and handed it over. 47 complaints, 5 years, all involving passengers of color or disabled passengers being removed from flights, denied boarding, or subjected to enhanced scrutiny that white passengers didn't face. Skywing settled every single one with NDAs and payments ranging from $10,000 to $50,000. Total payout? $2.1 million. All buried in legal files that corporate never flagged as a pattern, because technically, each settlement was handled separately. Marcus scrolled through the spreadsheet: names, dates, incident descriptions, settlement amounts. Each row was a person who'd been profiled, dismissed, removed, humiliated. Each row was a story that ended with a check and a signature promising silence. Jennifer Walsh, the flight attendant who pulled me off. How many of these 47 involve her? Nathan pointed to a filtered column. 31. She's been the primary actor in 66% of documented incidents. Gate agents and captains rotate, but Walsh is the common denominator. And Marcus, she's been with Skywing for 28 years. If these are just the complaints that resulted in settlements, how many incidents never got reported? How many people just accepted it and moved on? Marcus stopped scrolling, looked at one entry in particular. September 2021. Dr. James Wilson, black surgeon, removed from flight because Jennifer Walsh decided his boarding pass looked suspicious, despite being legitimately issued. Wilson had been traveling to perform an emergency transplant surgery. The recipient died because Wilson arrived too late. Skywing settled for $50,000 and a promise that no one would ever know. Get me Dr. Wilson's contact information, and everyone else on this list. I want to know if they'll testify. I want their stories on record. I want a federal investigation that tears Skywing's operations apart layer by layer until everyone understands this wasn't an isolated incident. It was policy. Nathan drove toward the loop. Traffic was thick with morning commuters, everyone locked in their metal boxes, pretending the previous 48 hours hadn't just reshaped the airline industry. But the billboards knew. Every third advertisement was a competitor taking shots. Fly United, we keep you in your seat. And American Airlines, where passengers are people. And the particularly brutal Southwest, no algorithms, no attitude, no problem. The board meeting is set for 3 p.m. today. Everyone's flying in. They want answers about why we're destroying a company we have $650 million invested in. Because sometimes burning down the house is the only way to kill the infestation. Nathan glanced over. That's not going to satisfy them. These are money people. They care about returns, not justice. Then I'll explain it in language they understand. Skywing is a liability. The culture is toxic. The lawsuits are coming. Between the viral video, the complaint pattern, and the federal investigation that's about to launch, this company is uninsurable. Every passenger who boards a Skywing flight is now a potential plaintiff. Every employee is a potential witness. The brand is poison. Our $650 million would be worth zero in 6 months anyway. We're just accelerating the inevitable. They reached Sterling and Hayes' building, a limestone tower on 6th Avenue that Marcus had bought into 7 years ago when the firm was small enough to need every partner's capital contribution. Now it occupied 3 full floors and employed 120 lawyers and support staff. The kind of success that should have felt triumphant, but mostly just felt like more weight to carry. The elevator delivered them to the 42nd floor. Marcus's office was corner, glass walls overlooking the city, furnished in the same mid-century modern aesthetic that said successful but not ostentatious. His assistant, Patricia, 63, been with him since he made partner, took one look at his face, and her expression crumpled into something between sympathy and horror. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry about your mother. If you need anything—" "Thank you, Patricia. I need the Skywing files. Everything we have. Corporate structure, debt documents, complaint records. And I need you to start reaching out to the people on Nathan's list. Tell them Marcus Sterling would like to speak with them about their experiences with Skywing Airlines." Patricia nodded, retreated to her desk. Marcus dropped his duffel in the corner and collapsed into his chair. The butterfly bandages on his temple were starting to peel. His ribs still ached. His wrists bore purple marks that hadn't quite faded, physical evidence of an encounter that 200 million people had now watched, but that he couldn't quite process as something that had happened to him rather than something he'd observed from a distance. Nathan lingered in the doorway. "The media requests are overwhelming. CNN wants an interview. So does NBC, CBS, Fox, every major outlet. Social media is calling you a hero, a victim, a symbol. Everyone wants a piece of the story." "Tell them no. I'm not doing interviews until after the board meeting. Maybe not even then. The story tells itself. I don't need to narrate." "Marcus." Nathan's voice dropped lower, the tone he used when he was about to say something Marcus wouldn't want to hear. "Skywing's CEO called me again this morning. Thomas Reed. He's desperate. The stock closed yesterday at 4.17. It opened this morning at 2.89. The company is hemorrhaging. He's authorized me to convey that they'll agree to any settlement terms you want. Any amount. Any reforms. Full apology. Termination of all involved employees. Whatever it takes to make this stop." Marcus turned his chair to face the window, watched traffic crawl along Michigan Avenue 42 floors below. Thought about his mother's last coherent words. Don't become them. Don't let the fight turn you into something you're not. "What do you think I should do?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "I think you're well within your rights to destroy them. The contract allows it. The moral case is clear. They hurt you. They've hurt dozens of others. They deserve consequences. But Marcus, 40,000 employees, baggage handlers making $30,000 a year, gate agents working 2 jobs to pay rent, mechanics with families. If Skywing collapses, those people lose everything, and most of them had nothing to do with what happened to you. Most of them perpetuated a system that enabled what happened to me. The gate agent who scanned my pass 4 times, the TSA agent who searched my bag, the culture that taught Jennifer Walsh that a black man in a hoodie was automatically suspicious. None of them ordered my removal, but all of them participated in the machinery that made my removal inevitable. So punish the culture, reform the company. But do you have to kill it? Marcus spun back around. You're supposed to be on my side. I am on your side. That's why I'm asking the question. Because 3 days from now, when Skywing files bankruptcy and the news shows footage of unemployed workers with children to feed, people are going to ask if this was justice or revenge. And you're going to have to live with the answer. Nathan left. Marcus sat alone in his office, watching the clock tick toward 3 p.m. Patricia brought the files, stacks of them. Corporate documents and complaint records and settlement agreements. Marcus started reading. Not because he needed to, he'd written half these contracts, reviewed the rest, but because reading was something to do, besides thinking about his mother's empty hospital room, or the way his head had sounded when it hit the overhead bin. 11 a.m. Patricia buzzed through on the intercom. "Mr. Sterling?
There's someone here to see you.
She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. Her name is Linda Patterson. She says you'll remember her from the flight. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Linda Patterson, the junior flight attendant who'd approached him with the tablet, who'd looked genuinely distressed when she told him he'd been selected to deplane, who'd been caught in the machinery just like he had, except she'd been operating it instead of being crushed by it. Send her in. The woman who entered was younger than Marcus remembered from the chaos of Tuesday night. Mid-20s, dark circles under her eyes, wearing jeans and a Skywing fleece jacket that she'd probably put on without thinking and now looked like evidence. She stopped just inside the door, hands twisted together, clearly terrified.
Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry to just show up. I know you probably don't want to see anyone I understand if you want me to leave, but I needed to talk to you.
To explain, Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit. She sat, pulled off the fleece like she'd suddenly realized what it represented. Underneath was a Loyola University sweatshirt. Student, or recent graduate. Marcus revised his estimate of her age down. 23, maybe. 24.
I didn't know.
Her voice came out rushed, pressured, words tumbling over each other in the need to get them out.
I knew something was wrong.
When Jennifer gave me the tablet and told me to tell you to deplane, I asked her why. She said the computer selected you. But Mr. Sterling, I've worked for Skywing for 2 years, and I've seen the algorithm before, and it doesn't work like that. It's supposed to pick based on check-in time and fare class and status. But you checked in hours before takeoff. Your ticket was full fare economy. There were at least 15 passengers who checked in after you, who paid less, who should have been selected first. But Jennifer picked you, not the computer. Her. Marcus leaned back. Why are you telling me this? Because I tried to warn you. I saw what was happening. I knew it was wrong. But I was scared. I'm 24 years old. I have student loans. I need this job. And Jennifer? She's senior. She has connections. Everyone knows if you cross her, you don't last. So I just delivered the message and walked away and let it happen. And then I watched them drag you off the plane, and I knew I should have said something, done something, but I didn't. And now Skywing is collapsing, and you're going to lose your job anyway. Linda flinched. I'm already gone. They fired me yesterday. Administrative restructuring, they called it, but I know why. I'm the one who looked guilty on the videos. I'm the one approaching you with a tablet. Jennifer's on paid administrative leave and might get her job back. But me? I'm done. Which is fine. It's not fine. I have a daughter. She's 2. I'm a single mom, and I don't know how I'm going to pay rent next month. But that's not why I'm here. She reached into her bag, pulled out a tablet, her personal device, not Skywing's, opened a file and slid it across the desk. This is everything I could access before they locked me out of the system. Complaint logs, internal memos, training documents. There's an email chain from 2 years ago where regional management discusses Jennifer Walsh's passenger removal rate. They know she targets people. They know there's a pattern. But her metrics on other performance indicators are good, so they let it slide. There's even a memo from last year where someone in HR flagged her behavior as potential liability and was told to drop it because investigating would cost more than settling occasional complaints. Marcus opened the file, started scrolling. Email after email documenting exactly what Nathan had found in the settlement records. But this was worse, because this was contemporary knowledge. Management knew. HR knew. Legal knew. They'd calculated the cost of Jennifer Walsh's discrimination and decided it was cheaper than stopping her. Why are you giving this to me? Linda met his eyes. Hers were red-rimmed, exhausted, but clear. Because what happened to you was wrong. Because I was part of it, even though I didn't want to be. Because if I stay silent now,
then I'm no different than all the managers who read those emails and decided profit mattered more than people. I can't fix what happened. I can't get your mother back or undo the assault or make the last 2 days disappear. But I can give you ammunition. I can make sure that when this goes to court or to Congress or wherever it's going, you have documentation showing this wasn't an accident. It was policy.
Marcus studied her. 24 years old, single mother, fired, rent due. Probably no savings because nobody has savings at 24 working for an airline. She was handing him evidence that would bury Skywing, and in the process, guaranteeing she'd never work in the industry again because whistleblowers didn't get hired, they got blacklisted.
What do you want in return?
Nothing.
I mean, if you're actually asking, I want my daughter to grow up in a world where people don't get judged by their skin color or their clothes or their seat assignment. I want to be able to tell her that when I saw something wrong, I did something about it, even when it cost me. But I'm not here for a reward. I'm here because it's the right thing to do. Marcus copied the files to a secure server, handed the tablet back. Linda, thank you. This is going to matter in ways you probably can't imagine right now. This is going to matter. She stood, pulled the fleece back on, probably because it was cold outside and she couldn't afford to care about what it represented. Started toward the door, stopped, turned back. Mr. Sterling? I'm sorry. About your mother. About everything. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. Justice or peace or whatever this becomes. She left. Marcus sat with Linda's files open on his screen and felt the first crack in his certainty. She'd lost her job, would lose her apartment, was risking her entire future to give him evidence he probably could have subpoenaed anyway. And she'd done it not for money or immunity or any advantage, but because watching someone get hurt had broken something in her that staying silent would only compound. 1 p.m. Marcus called Nathan. I need you to set up a meeting with Skywing's CEO, Thomas Reed, tomorrow morning. Tell him I want to negotiate. Silence on the other end. Then Nathan's voice, carefully neutral. You're accepting the settlement? I'm exploring options. Set it up. 2 p.m. Marcus reviewed the board presentation he'd prepared. Financial analysis, risk assessment. The case for why accelerating Skywing's collapse was the rational fiduciary decision regardless of personal grievance. 53 slides of data and projections and legal citations. The kind of presentation that turned emotional decisions into rational ones by burying them under enough numbers that no one could argue with the math. Except now he was looking at slide 17, projected employee impact, and seeing Linda Patterson's face. Seeing her 2-year-old daughter, whose name he didn't know, but who'd grow up in whatever world her mother's choices created. Seeing 40,000 versions of that story, variations on the theme of collateral damage. 3 p.m. The conference room filled with Sterling and Hayes' board of directors. 15 people who collectively managed $300 million in assets and expected returns that justified the risk. Nathan sat to Marcus's right. The others arranged themselves around the table in the informal hierarchy that develops in any organization. Rainmakers near the head, support partners near the sides. The one woman and 2 other people of color positioned where they could be visible, but not dominant. Marcus stood, connected his laptop to the projector, pulled up the presentation, started to explain why destroying Skywing was the only rational choice. Got through 7 slides before David Morrison, 62, white, managing partner emeritus who'd founded the firm 40 years ago and still carried weight in every decision, held up a hand. Marcus, stop. We've all seen the videos. We've all read the coverage. Every person in this room knows what Skywing did to you was unconscionable. But this board's fiduciary duty isn't to your personal vendetta. It's to the fund, to our investors, to the returns we promised when we took their money. So before you show us 50 more slides of financial justification, I want you to answer one question honestly. Is this decision about protecting the fund, or is it about making them pay? The room went quiet. Marcus looked around the table, saw skepticism, saw concern, saw the same calculation he'd been running for 2 days. Profit versus principal, return on investment versus return on dignity. Both. It's about both. Skywing is a liability now. The brand is toxic. The lawsuits are coming. Federal investigations are launching. Every metric we use to evaluate corporate health says this company is terminal. So yes, calling the debt protects our investment. But do I also want them to understand what they've done? Do I want Captain Robert Hayes and Jennifer Walsh and Thomas Reed to feel the weight of consequences they've avoided for years? Absolutely. And if you're asking me to pretend those two motivations don't intersect, then you're asking me to lie. Morrison leaned forward. What if there's a third option? What if we don't liquidate? What if we restructure? Restructuring requires cooperation from existing management, from the same people who created this culture. Why would I trust them to fix what they built? Because you don't have to trust them. You have $650 million in debt that converts to equity. You could take control, install new management, reform the policies, fix the culture. You could turn Skywing into the airline that learned from its mistakes instead of the airline that died from them. Marcus pulled up slide 42. The ownership structure, the conversion terms. Morrison was right. The bonds could convert to equity at Marcus's option, giving Sterling and Hayes majority control. He'd known that, had known it when he drafted the terms, but ownership meant responsibility, meant being accountable for 40,000 employees and 10,000 daily flights, and all the complexity of running an airline while reforming its culture. Meant choosing to build instead of destroy. If we take control, we're taking on massive risk. The stock is at 2.89. The company is hemorrhaging cash. Customers are fleeing. This isn't a turnaround story. It's a corpse we'd be trying to resurrect. Morrison smiled. Then maybe we should ask, what would your mother want you to do? The words hit like a fist to the solar plexus. Marcus felt his breath catch, felt the grief he'd been burying under work suddenly surge up through the cracks. His mother's voice in his head. Don't become them. Don't let the fight turn you into something you're not. That's not fair! No, it's not. But you're the one who taught me that fairness doesn't matter as much as outcomes. So what's the outcome here, Marcus? 40,000 people unemployed? A viral video that becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when you mistreat passengers? Or do we do something harder? Do we take control and prove that the system can change, that accountability can lead to reform, that breaking things isn't the only way to fix them? The board meeting stretched to 2 hours. Arguments back and forth. Financial projections revised on the fly. Risk assessments updated to account for hostile takeover scenarios versus liquidation scenarios. Marcus watched his carefully constructed case for destruction get dismantled by people who saw a different path, a harder path, one that required more courage than revenge ever would. 5 p.m. The vote. 11 in favor of conversion and restructuring, 4 in favor of liquidation. Marcus abstained. I need to think about this. Give me until tomorrow afternoon. If I'm going to run an airline, I need to understand what I'm committing to. The board dispersed. Nathan stayed behind. You know this is the right call. Destroying Skywing feels good, but fixing it means something. It means taking responsibility for a system I didn't build, for problems I didn't create, for 40,000 people whose livelihoods depend on decisions I make over the next 6 months. Yes, that's exactly what it means. Welcome to the burden of power that actually matters. Marcus returned to his office, sat in the dark as the city lights came on 42 floors below. Pulled out his phone, scrolled through the videos of his removal one more time. Watched himself get dragged down the aisle. Watched the blood. watched the casual certainty of violence delivered by people who'd never face consequences. Except they could face consequences. Not just losing jobs, real consequences. The kind that came from having to work for the person they'd wronged. The kind that came from watching Marcus Sterling transform the company that had failed him into something better, and knowing they'd been given a chance to be part of that transformation, or could choose to leave. That was a different kind of justice. Slower, harder, more expensive, but maybe more real. Friday morning. Marcus woke in his penthouse to see Skywing stock had opened at 1.94. The financial news was running obituaries. Bankruptcy lawyers were already circling. The company had 16 hours left on its cure period before the debt came due. Marcus, dressed in a Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, added the gold cufflinks his mother had given him for his 30th birthday, looked at himself in the mirror, and saw someone who'd been given a choice between destruction and creation, between the satisfying certainty of revenge and the complicated uncertainty of reform. Saw someone who could either become the weapon that destroyed a broken system or the tool that rebuilt it. 9 a.m., Sterling and Hayes' conference room. Thomas Reed sat across the table looking like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. 60 years old, panned from a yacht vacation that now seemed like ancient history. Eyes red from sleepless nights, watching his company die in real time. Mr. Sterling, thank you for agreeing to meet. I want to start by saying, Marcus held up a hand, I'm not interested in apologies. I'm interested in accountability. And I'm interested in whether you're capable of understanding the difference. Reed closed his mouth, nodded, smart enough to know when speaking would only make things worse. My firm is prepared to convert our debt to equity. We'll take 51% ownership of Skywing. You and your entire C-suite will resign immediately. No golden parachutes, no severance beyond what your contracts legally require. You leave with your reputations in tatters and the knowledge that you built a culture so toxic it nearly destroyed the company you were supposed to lead. Reed's face went pale. If we resign, who runs the airline? I do. Interim CEO effective Monday morning. I'll install new leadership committed to reform. We'll implement third-party oversight on all passenger interactions. We'll review every complaint from the last 10 years and reach out to every person who was paid to stay quiet. We'll create a compensation fund for victims of discrimination. We'll mandate bias training that actually works instead of the checkbox compliance nonsense you've been doing. And we'll do it publicly, transparently, in a way that makes every other airline terrified they'll be next if they don't fix their own problems. Reed looked at his lawyers, back at Marcus. And if we refuse? Then I call the debt due in, Marcus checked his watch, 7 hours and 43 minutes. You file bankruptcy by end of business. The company gets carved up and sold for parts. 40,000 people lose their jobs. Your legacy becomes a case study in corporate failure. Your choice. The lawyers conferred in whispers. Reed looked like a man watching his empire crumble and trying to calculate whether there was any path that didn't end in humiliation. Finally, he looked up. I accept. With one condition. Jennifer Walsh, Captain Hayes, the officers who removed you, I want them prosecuted. Criminal charges. I want the world to see that individuals are held accountable, not just institutions. Marcus considered. Jennifer Walsh, who targeted him and 30 other people over 5 years. Captain Hayes, who'd looked at him and seen something disposable. Officer Mitchell, who'd grabbed his arm hard enough to leave bruises and slammed his head into metal. They deserved prosecution. Deserved prison. Deserved to understand that actions have consequences, even for people who'd spent careers avoiding them. But prosecution would mean trials, testimony, reliving the assault over and over in courtrooms and press conferences, turning himself into a professional victim whose identity became inseparable from his trauma. No, not criminal charges, but I want them fired. Cause termination, no references, no ability to work in their industries again. I want Jennifer Walsh to understand that being good at your job doesn't excuse being terrible to humans. I want Captain Hayes to lose his license permanently. And I want Officer Mitchell dismissed from the force with enough documentation that he never works in law enforcement again. Can you make that happen? Reed nodded slowly. Yes, I can make that happen. They signed papers, shook hands. Reed left looking like a man walking to his own execution. Nathan stayed behind.
You're really doing this? Taking over an airline? I'm really doing this. Your mother would be proud. Marcus felt the crack widen, felt the grief break through, felt tears that he'd been suppressing since Wednesday afternoon finally forced their way out. He turned away from Nathan, looked out at the city, tried to hold himself together, and failed completely. She'll never know. She died thinking I was going to destroy them. She told me not to become them, and then she died before I could tell her I'd heard, before I could promise her I'd find a different way. Nathan's hand landed on his shoulder, steady, present, the kind of touch that said, "You don't have to hold this alone." She knew. That's why she said it, because she knew you'd be standing exactly here, having exactly this conversation, making exactly this choice. She raised you to be the kind of person who could walk into fire and come out holding something worth saving. She knew. They stood there, two lawyers in an empty conference room, one crying, one keeping watch. Outside, a city went about its business. Planes took off from O'Hare carrying passengers who might never know how close they'd come to losing an airline, or how that airline was about to be reborn into something it should have been from the start. Marcus wiped his face, straightened his tie, became himself again. Get me meetings with every department head. I want to understand this company inside out before Monday. And get me Linda Patterson's contact information. She's unemployed. She has documentation we need. And she deserves to be part of fixing what she helped expose. Nathan made notes. What about Captain Hayes? Do you want to talk to him? Marcus thought about the man who'd looked at him and said, "I am the law," who'd stood watching while Marcus bled, who would now spend the rest of his life knowing that the passenger he'd dismissed owned the company that had just fired him. Eventually, but not yet. First, I need to build something worth showing him. Something that proves the system can change. And then maybe we'll talk about what kind of redemption looks like for people who spent their careers harming others. The sun set over Chicago. Skywing stock closed at 3.07, up slightly on news that bankruptcy had been averted. The financial press ran stories about mysterious last-minute negotiations. Employees who'd been preparing for unemployment breathed again. And Marcus Sterling sat in his office, surrounded by organizational charts and operational reports, and the enormous weight of responsibility he'd chosen over the satisfying simplicity of revenge. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. He opened it. Mr. Sterling, this is Linda Patterson. Your office said you wanted to talk. I don't know what about, but I'm available whenever you need me. And thank you for whatever you're doing. It matters. Marcus typed back. Monday, 9 a.m., Sterling and Hayes offices. We're rebuilding an airline, and I need people who understand what's broken. Interested? 3 dots, then. Yes. Absolutely yes. Marcus looked at the city lights, thought about his mother, thought about the choice she'd given him in her final hours, thought about how justice could mean destruction or creation, punishment or transformation, and how the harder path was usually the one worth taking. He opened his laptop, started drafting the memo that would go out Monday morning to every Skywing employee. Not an apology. Apologies were words, and words were cheap. A commitment, a blueprint, a promise that the company that had dragged him bleeding from a plane would become the company that proved even broken systems
could learn to see people as human. And somewhere in Dallas, Captain Robert Hayes was probably sitting in his living room, wondering what came next. Wondering if losing his job meant losing everything, or if somewhere in the rubble of his career, there might be space for something different. Marcus would find out. Eventually.
But first, he had an airline to save, and a culture to transform, and 40,000 people whose futures now depended on whether the man they'd wronged could turn rage into reform.
The work started Monday. The real justice started now.